Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like. It helps more than you might think. On November 15, 1796 in Les Cayes, Haiti, the house of a well-known plantation owner goes up in flames with his family in it. After this, a series of unexplained deaths in the plantation followed. People in the neighborhood began to flee. Even the authorities didn't understand what was going on. A few weeks later, a young slave woman in the plantation, Amara, sought for the attention of the priest in town. And when she was finally let to see him, what she told him was not just horrifying, but beyond the understanding of the ordinary. This is her story. The town is in grave danger. You must listen attentively. This is not for the faint-hearted. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable, but it is nothing but the truth. We had just finished on one of the sugarcane farms. I can remember it was the harvesting season. That day we were given some boiled rice and fish, and then the guards came in and passed around some new clothing for us. They only did that whenever they thought we deserved some reward. But I could have preferred they added more spices to the food they served. That would have been a better reward. We had worked on the plantation all our lives. After the death of our father, my older brother vowed that he would take us out of the plantation. I believed him. That day, he talked about a plan. These were his words. If we want to get out of here, this is the perfect time to do it. Why do you feel this is the perfect time? I had asked him. The harvest period is nearly over. The carriage would be leaving the farm with the harvested sugarcane to the market very soon. That's the only time they would open the gates to these walls. If we can find a way to get into one of those carriages, then we would leave this plantation, he had said. The plan sounded good, but then my mother kicked against it. She said, "Even if this crazy plan works, where do we go from there? We do not know anywhere else aside these walls. Let's stick to where we are sure of food and a place to lay our heads." I wanted to speak, but my brother asked that we let it go. He said Mother was right, but I knew that she wasn't. She too was weak just like Father was. That night, I turned to sleep before the lights went out. The next morning, it was time to begin the day's job, working on a different farm this time. My mother and brother were already up, but my little sister still lay there. It was unlike her. She used to be up and about before anyone else. I got closer to her and discovered that her body felt warmer than it should, and her eyes were reddish. This was how it began with Father. My mother panicked. She held her close. By that time, most of the other slaves had already left the shack. She told my brother and I to go join the other slaves so that she could hide in the shack with our little sister. Just as we stepped out, the guards got in and found her. I can still remember her wails when they whipped her with my sister in her arms. That day, I worked with tears in my eyes. Everything seemed blurry as all I could think was about my mother and sister. By the time the sun disappeared out of the sky, I hurried back to the shack and found them curled up in a corner. When I got close, my mother opened her eyes, but my sister had gotten worse. She needed to get some medication as soon as possible. That evening, some of the guards came in and shared some drugs to the slaves, but since our section was far beyond, the medication didn't get to us. My mother cried all night because she knew that my sister might not survive. I knew I had to do something, so that night, just as it was lights off, I sneaked out of the shack. I had studied the plantation so well that I knew all the corners and the locations of where they kept the medications. Before it was morning, I was back with the medication for my sister, but it was only enough to keep her for a few more days. Seeing that she was dying, my mother finally agreed to my brother's plan. The night we were supposed to go, I was picked to work in the manor with the maids to make some bread. It was our only shot, so I asked them to leave without me. It was hard to say goodbye, but we had to do what needed to be done for my little sister to survive. The night they left, I stayed up all night. I hoped that they would not find them leaving. I didn't know what would happen if they did, and I didn't want to find out. When I didn't hear anything all night and even the next day, my worries turned into loneliness. I thought it was over until one evening, the guards stormed the shacks and asked that we all assembled outside. The owner of the plantation stood there. I thought they wanted to do a head count, but it turned out to be my greatest fear. My family, who I had thought would have been somewhere safe, was dragged out in chains. My heart sank, seeing them out there. And then the plantation owner began to speak. These were his words. We found some stray dogs leaving the plantation, and that is against the rules. With every rule broken, there are punishments attached. For doing this, you all will die by my hands." I couldn't believe my ears. Immediately, tears flowed down my eyes. I didn't speak. I just stood there helplessly as the guards pulled them away. That was the last time I saw my family alive. The next morning, their bodies were returned to the shack, mutilated and lifeless. After what happened, working on the farm became unbearable. There were no jokes from my brother, no giggles from my little sister, or my mother's hopeful eyes to keep me through the harshness of it all. One morning, I was out on the farm when I spotted the plantation owner with his family, 2 girls and his wife. They got into a carriage and rolled out of the gate. It hurt me that he had the company of his family, while my family's blood cried out from the earth, demanding justice. I had nothing left, only aching muscles and weak bones. Yet, I kept going. I had to. It had been a week since he had taken my family away. Their screams still echo in my head. Every day, the pain ate off me. I craved peace. Justice wasn't for me to serve, and as a slave girl, I had nothing. All I wanted was peace, to be able to move on. I had tried the herbs, but they only made me sleep. So, I sought out the wisdom of Maidu, the village's voodoo priestess. She was a woman of ancient knowledge, or so I had heard. And I knew that if anyone could help me find this closure I was looking for with my family, it would be her. The day I went to see Maidu was the day everything changed. I can still remember that day when I arrived at her hut. She greeted me with a cup of native tea. I told her everything that had happened with my family and how I could still hear their voices in my head. I told her all I needed was peace and a way to let the pain go. After I was done telling her, she nodded and said, "Your pain is deep, my child. I can take it all away." I smiled and thanked her, but what she said next made me wonder. She said, "But there is a better option to finally find peace with yourself and that of your loved ones who have passed." "What do you mean?" I had asked. "Making the voices go away would not give you the peace that you want, but giving peace to your departed ones will." I nodded and told her that I would do whatever it took to make it all over. She performed some sort of ritual using my hair and the mud underneath her feet. Then she crafted a small, crude doll and said my family dwelled in it, and told me to pray with it every night so I and my family can finally find peace. I took the doll, feeling a strange connection to it. She instructed me on how to summon the spirits of my ancestors. I thanked her, but before I left, she held me back. Her next words terrified me. She said, "Tell no one, show no one." That night I prayed with the doll. It was lights out in the shacks. I lay there curled up in my space with the doll in my grip, and then I said some words to it, telling it about my pain. It didn't respond, but speaking to it made my body calm. That night was the first night I slept well after the death of my family. By the time I woke up the next morning, I can remember that we were asked to carry some of the bags of harvested sugarcane into the trucks, and when we went into the store, we were chased by a pungent smell. The plantation owner ordered the bags to be opened, and when they were opened, we noticed that all the sugarcane we had harvested the previous day had all spoiled. I didn't know how that was possible because sometimes we kept sugarcane for weeks in the store, but they were still fresh when we wanted to send them out. That day, I saw the sadness in his eyes for a bit, and then he shrugged it off. His exact words were, "We lose and we win. Today we have lost. Tomorrow we would win." Then, he ordered for the sugarcane to be disposed of, and so we did. They made us work extra hours. By the time I was done for the day, my back ached all night that I couldn't sleep. I took up the doll I had stuffed away underneath my dress and prayed to it. I told it about the pain I felt and how the guards had been so hard on us because of the bad sugarcane. Then gradually, I felt the pain go away, and I was able to sleep again. The next morning was different. I didn't wake up to the sound of a bell that usually woke us up, or the hoarse voice of the angry guards kicking at us. I asked the rest of the slaves what was going on, but they too had no idea about it. We didn't work that day. When the plantation owner found out that there was no one working on the farms, he came to the shacks and began throwing things around. Later that day, we discovered that all the guards had gotten the flu. The plantation owner got new guards, He instructed that we all get 100 slashes on our backs for not coming out to work. That night, I cried because my back ached so much. The doll was all I had. I took it close and spoke to it. But instead, I felt worse. The only people who could truly make the pains of being a slave go away were no more. There was no hope for me to ever find a good life outside the plantation. Speaking to the doll felt stupid, and so I put it back under my dress and tried to sleep. Somehow I managed to, because I can remember that I was awoken by wailing and screams. News came that the house of the plantation owner had gone up in flames, with his family trapped in it. No one survived except him. I nearly felt bad for him, but then I didn't. Instead, unlike everyone else, I took up my tools and began to work, feeling nothing but joy. It was weird feeling that way after hearing such news, but that was the best part of my day. I stood at a corner, watching as they moved the ashes of the bodies of his family away while he stood there. I saw the sadness in his eyes. This time he didn't shrug it off like he did the bad sugarcane. I stood until everyone had gone back to the shack. He turned and saw me there watching, and then I began to laugh. It was like I fed on his pain. I just couldn't help it. I laughed out loud until the guards dragged me back to the shacks. I noticed that the more I prayed, the more bad things happened to him. For a moment it felt good. I finally had control over something. Then I directed my prayers to him. I told the doll about him and how my family was murdered by his own hands. The pain of losing his family wasn't enough for me. One night we were all awoken by a scream from him as he ran out. He complained of seeing a doll. His subordinates tried to calm him down, but they couldn't. I sat there, watching from a distance. The next day I watched as some skilled doctors and priests ran off his house. They called him mad, if only they knew he was the doll underneath my dress. During the day's work, I saved one of the pins we used for work. I would puncture holes in the doll. Whenever I pierced the pin into the doll, the plantation owner would run out and begin his wails. He believed that there was a dark force upon him that threatened his life. But as usual, no one believed him. They all said that the death of his family had taken a toll on him. He searched high and low for the source of this evil, but could find nothing. One morning, the plantation workers found his body, lifeless and twisted, after which I buried the doll. For a few days, it seemed that everything had returned to normal. But then, one morning, when we woke up, we found the livestock all dead in the fields. Their eyes were black and their guts ripped open. It was a gruesome sight. No one knew the cause of it. Perhaps a wild beast lurked in the area, and so we had to stay clear. Then the nightmare began. Well, not for me, but for everyone else, including the overseers and guards. They would complain that they had seen their loved ones been tortured and killed. I didn't mind because I had no loved ones. The horror only began for me when over 50 plantation workers were found dead. My mind raced through many possibilities that could have caused their deaths, but nothing made sense. Every other day our numbers dwindled. People who lived close to the plantation fled too when they heard what was going on in the plantation. The death spread out. It affected the crops and the animals. I suspected the doll, and so I went to where I had buried it and took it out. I began to pray to it to stop the horrors, but it only got worse. Then I decided to go back to the voodoo priestess. Perhaps she would undo what she had done. But when I went to her hut, there was no one there. It looked like it had been deserted for a long time, but that wouldn't be possible because I had only been there a few weeks ago. I didn't know what else to do. The well dried up, and those who were not hunted in their dreams began to die of dehydration or starvation. So I threw the doll into a lake, hoping that its evil would stop, but it didn't. I needed to come clean as the voices in my head increased. I thought that if a priestess had given me the doll, then it was only someone with the knowledge of the supernatural that could help. That's why I asked to see the priest. Do not judge me. But my heart was poisoned by the sufferings of my people. After listening to Amara's words, the local authorities and the priest stared in horror and disbelief. They knew they were dealing with something horrible. Amara was locked up in a dungeon as she was declared a witch and set to be burnt at the stake after they had managed to contain the evil. The people searched for this voodoo priestess that Amara had mentioned, but they found out that no woman with such name ever existed in town. The authorities requested that they search the lake for the doll. They searched for weeks but found nothing. The day Amara was to be executed, the priest advised the people that since Amara's spirit is linked to the doll, killing her would only make things worse in the town. That the only way they can get the curse out of the town was if she was banished. And so, they banished her. The day Amara left town was the day they finally found the doll. The priest asked that they bring her back as she was the only one that can break the spell. The people went after her trail to bring her back, but they never found her again. To this day, the plantation is still a place of horror as they were never able to break the curse. You've made it, for now. Thank you for joining on this horrifying journey. If you want more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and to follow on other platforms. There are many more stories to come, and if you enjoyed this, please like the video. It really helps. Let me know your favorite part or any suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, if you can.